Welcome, one and all. Welcome to those of you here in the room with me at the Army and Navy Club in London's glamorous West End. Welcome to you who are joining us via Zoom. It's my pleasure to inaugurate February's meeting of the Kipling Society. Introduce our speaker tonight, Mr. Andy Williamson. So Andy is a leading expert in the golden the leisure industry in general. He's often popping up with words of wisdom on radio and TV. And that into the world's greatest and Beyblades the West End through time. Notably, he's the author of Brown's Family, definitive history of London's oldest and one of its best known luxury hotels, where we are now sitting. And many of you know, it was Kipling's Home Away from Home. He stayed there countless times over a passage of more than 40 years. Uh, a final reminder, please mute if you're on Zoom, because and with no further ado, otherwise, over to Andy.
Lovely. Well, lovely to see you all tonight, both in person and also virtually. I feel very honoured to be speaking to the Kipling Society and obviously very slightly apprehensive speaking to the experts on someone, but I think I can teach you a thing or two about Kipling. This isn't going to just be chalk and talk. I'm going to get you involved from the outset here with a quick straw poll. So don't be shy, just be honest. Hands up here. I'm just interested to know, kind of test my knowledge base here. Hands up if you know that Rudyard Kipling spent his honeymoon at Brown's Hotel. Okay, all right.
I didn't know that. It was a
Okay.
hotel.
Excellent. All right, next one. So it's good. It's good to know. I just want to, I assumed it'd be everyone. Oh, we'll come to that. Very good. Very good. No spoilers. No spoilers. Excuse this cough as well. It's come back specially for the talk. Second question. Who knows that Rudyard Kipling, while staying at Brown's, had dinner with Lawrence of Arabia? You'll all be learning something tonight. And then just lastly, who's actually visited Brown's Hotel? Okay, quite a few people. Excellent. Right. So I'm just going to start by giving you a bit of a background, a bit of a primer on Brown's Hotel itself, which, as Alex mentioned in the intro, has the distinction of being London's oldest luxury hotel. And I qualify that. You say, well, come on, prove it. How do you know? My qualification is that it's never been relocated, renamed, or rebuilt. Okay, so it's on that basis that it's London's oldest luxury hotel. A few photos here of the hotel today. It has this very impressive frontage along Albemarle Street, but it is effectively just a series of townhouses pushed together and given a nice lick of whitewash to look unified. It's got a very, attractive interior. It's got the public lounge and the dining room and this nice entrance, which I have to say, although it's, a nice portico, I still get slightly annoyed when I visit about the missing apostrophe. I don't know if anyone else finds that annoying, but I've had words with the management, but again, just perhaps for people who are not Londoners, are not London based, just to kind of to orientate yourself, where is Brown's located? And of course, I've gone for a slide that makes it even harder to tell, but it is basically in the West End, just off Piccadilly, near Regent's Park, and I'll show that better on the next slide. So you have Piccadilly there, running along the bottom right of the slide, and then these two streets, Albemarle and Dover Street, which run in parallel, and Brown's Hotel fills the space between them. So now if you say to someone, where is Brown's Hotel? The answer is it's on Albemarle Street. But to a historian, where is Brown's Hotel? Well, it was actually Dover Street on which it was set up and founded. So I always, for me as a historian and as a traditionalist, I like to think of it still as located on Dover Street. So I'm just going to take you back to 1832 when the hotel opened. I've put a not 1837 there. you'll probably come away from this, you might be interested and you might look up something online, and you will see a lot of places where it says 1837, and you'll say, well, Andy, he was lying to us. What does he know? God, where do we get our speakers? um, the reality is, so hotels are full of legends, and we'll come across another one or two of those related to Kipling. But hotels are not, they're places that move quickly, and they want an easy sort of fix. So people always assumed and always had latched on to the fact that it was founded in 1837. But when I was doing my digging, my research, I managed to add 5 years to the age, which is one of those rare occasions when someone doesn't mind being older than they've actually admitted to before. Um, so the hotel, it was set up on Browns was set up on Dover Street. Now, when it started, it was just one single townhouse, 23 Dover Street. And the person who set it up was a gentleman called James Brown, hence Brown's Hotel. And he set it up with his wife, Sarah. And this was a very, very typical um, way of going about things. Okay, so he had worked in domestic service, as had his wife. So they had experience of working with the well-heeled, the aristocracy of that period. When you got your little nest egg together, your next step was to set up, to say, right, I'll take that knowledge with me and I'll set up what is effectively a sort of luxurious bed and breakfast in those days. He couldn't build a hotel, he didn't have the money. So he took a lease on that one townhouse at 23 Dover Street. And it literally had four apartments in it, suites of rooms. There were no public facilities. So you have to kind of, think back to that time. No public facilities, no dining room, no bar. So guests would check in, and very much it was a hands-on experience. James and his wife lived in the hotel. They had two children who were born in the hotel. He also ran it with his sister and his mother-in-law. I can't think of anything worse, but anyway, he did. And so it very much was, your name was above the door, and it was your reputation which brought customers to the hotel. So if you, as James Brown, had done a good job and had people who remembered you from serving the aristocracy, and they knew, they'd say, "Oh, that Brown guy, he's good. Go and stay there." And what was also very, very typical was that if you sold the hotel to someone else, so say someone called Williamson, the name of the hotel would then change to recognize the new owner, so become Williamson's Hotel. A good example of that is Mivart's. So Mivart's Hotel in Brook Street was set up in 1812 and later sold to a William Claridge. So Mivart then became Claridge's, which we still have today. Brown's didn't ever get changed, although it did change hands. But for James Brown, he chose a great location. This in Mayfair, off the thoroughfare of Piccadilly, because this is very much where the wealthy came to work, rest, and play. It's the shops were there, the homes of the wealthy. It was the new fashionable district of London, so he'd chosen very well. So we're going to fast forward now, do my maths right, 60 years to 18th of January 1892. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here what that date signifies. It is obviously the date of Rudyard Kipling's wedding. And he had actually stayed at Langham's. I think someone here mentioned that. He'd stayed at Langham's prior to the wedding, and then was married in All Souls Church, which is just next to where the BBC is now located. There's a picture of it there at the time. It was a very quiet affair, very small wedding. His mother-in-law, I believe, was ill. There was a flu epidemic raging at the time. And so it was a really rather sort of sad affair. And he then goes off after the wedding, and the couple spend about a week staying at Brown's Hotel from the 18th to the 26th of January. And indeed, at the end of that, from Carrie's diary, his wife, we leave Brown's for 101 Earl's Court Road. Brown sends us our bill for £22 receipted. begs us to allow him this privilege as a slight repayment for the pleasure Rudd has given him. Only one small problem there. Brown no longer owned the hotel, but apart from that, it was, so the owner was different. It was actually the Fords by that stage who owned it. But anyway, so the importance here is it's from this, from his honeymoon, from his time staying at the hotel after his wedding, that love affair with Brown's began. And so for the next 44 years, he would stay at Brown's Hotel whenever he was in London, sometimes for a very short time, sometimes for extended periods, but he literally would use it as his home away from home. Um, so far, sort of so well known, that he stayed there. For me, though, the big thing is why did he choose Browns? Okay, because it's not the obvious choice. It's not the closest to the church. It wasn't sort of probably the best known hotel. It wasn't the largest, the most luxurious. It was a nice hotel, but why choose Browns? And when I was doing my research for the book, you know, I was hoping to find something, and obviously I was very pleased that I did. Um, so this gentleman, and I hope I've got to pronounce him correctly, the Earl of Dufferin, who becomes the Viceroy of India in the 1880s, 1884, he'd stayed at Brown's Hotel before going out to India to take up his position as Viceroy. And it seems incredible now when you have somebody, of his stature, but he took rooms and he basically conducted business before going out to India. So, for example, the Manchester Chamber of Commerce sent representatives and MPs from Manchester, and they went there to try to persuade him to extend the railway network within India. So there were people there who came to do business and um, try to kind of, pour ideas into his ear. So he'd stayed at Brown's. He obviously was impressed with what he saw, and then when he goes to India, up in Simla, he becomes, the Kiplings come into his social orbit. So that for me is the crucial connection. The Viceroy of India had stayed at Brown's. I'm sure that, when Kipling comes to his marriage, he says, "Oh, I can tell you where's a good place to stay. I've stayed there myself." And there, for me, that's the crucial link. So you have this very extended period when Kipling is staying at the hotel. So 44 years between 1892 and his death in 1936. But, as fans of Kipling, I'm sure what you want to know is, what was it like? Because it wasn't as the hotel is today. So going into the hotel today, you'd get a very different impression from what it was like in Kipling's day. So, first of all, the owners of the hotel, of Brown's Hotel, and for that probably the first century and more of Brown's existence, it was owned by families, and it was very much a family feel to the hotel. Um, Guests as well tended to come, be there as families. It would get passed down almost, as an heirloom from one generation to another. People would stay, and their children would stay, and their grandchildren would stay, and the hotel had a very family feel to it. But the two families during Kipling's time, first of all, the Ford family, they're the ones who paid his honeymoon bill, and they bought the hotel off James Brown at the end of his life in 1860, and they ran it for this incredible length of time for 68 years, all the way through to the 1920s. And you had the father, James John James Brown, James John. They're all called James. It's very confusing. James John Brown. Sorry, James John Ford, and then he had two sons, James Francis Ford and Henry Joseph Ford. So the person sitting there in the chair is James John, and then his two sons are at the back there. And he had more sons and daughters, but the two sons there are the ones that joined him in the hotel business. um, the hotel was a sort of bigger proposition when they ran it, and they had other hotels. So for them, it was a less. They didn't live at the hotel. They were still quite, very hands-on, but they'd sort of gone up a notch in society, and they became very friendly with a lot of their guests. Lovely story. Theodore Roosevelt, who became president of the United States, he's connected with his wedding. So he got married at um, and stayed at Brown's beforehand. The Fords got friendly with him and took him out for a ride in the country in their carriage. The carriage flipped over into a ditch. So the future president of the United States very almost killed by the Fords, but he was a well-known steeplechaser, and he knew how to fall properly when the carriage toppled over. Um, One thing that turned up in my research, and this is the point where you can all get very excited if you haven't. Um, Fortunately, it's half covered by all the people I anyway, a new letter emerged that he wrote. So he corresponded with the Fords. As I said, they were on friendly terms, and I managed to discover this letter in one of his descendants. Found it in a book. They just kept the pages of this book, and a small snippet of it. It's written by Kipling to Henry IV, one of the in April 1911, and it's introducing a German hotelier who Kipling had met while staying in Verney-les-Bains in the Pyrenees. So he's on holiday. He's writing back to Henry Ford, and by the way, no connection with the car manufacturer. And the letter said he wanted to talk with a man who knows business and all the great English hotel keeping. He couldn't do better than address himself to you. I wouldn't discount his manner, which is more mature than we're accustomed to in England. Let him talk out his ideas before you, and if you think it's worthwhile sending him on, to send him on. Um, Great to sort of see a letter that's not been seen before. Secondly, it's the Bond family, so that's the second date range there, 1948. Um, they were a Swiss family. They made their money and their name through the Souvretta House Hotel in Switzerland, and purchasing Brown's Hotel gave them a outpost in London. A lot of their guests were British. So it was like almost like a feeder hotel. Slightly more hands off than the Ford family would put a manager from the hotel, and they just pop in from time. Anton was a brother who looked after Brown's Hotel and their English interests, and he became manager of the Duchess Hotel. So all these wonderful things. And during the war, he was neutral, but he had a lot of German hotel interests. It said that during the war, he spied on his guests at Rochester, getting people to open his luggage and, and stuff like that. But as a Swiss neutral, they don't do anything about it. So yeah, it was time that 60, what was it, 68-year period that's the real gold age of Brown's Hotel, and the period when Kipling possessed that hotel. So you see that on the right there, which is shows you the stages of growth of Brown's Hotel. So right at the outset, it was started as this single townhouse, 23 Dover Street, one townhouse, very there, four suites of rooms. So that's on the right hand side, number one, line there. And what James Brown did was he extended the property, the hotel print to the sides. So he took over the townhouses to either side. Um, and that he did between 38 and 45. And it was as and when profits and money allowed him to. I mean, you have to remember this was buying leases, he couldn't afford to buy properties outright. But it was still very much, it was a hotel on Dover Street. And it wasn't until 1886 that the Ford family, who are now in charge, punched through and managed to get the entrance onto Albemarle Street. So this strange fact that the hotel gets turned around on its axis over time. So 1886, the first small slither on Albemarle Street. It's green, number 3, and then the big leap forward was number 4, 1889, the purchase of St George's Hotel. Now, St George's Hotel had a reputation of its own. It was a well-established hotel with a very good clientele. It had actually burnt to the ground in 1841, and Queen Victoria had seen the fire from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. So a huge conflagration. And amazingly, Brown's Hotel itself was only very, very lightly damaged by that, which is incredible. But they rebuilt it, and because of the renown of St George's Hotel, for many years the hotel was known as Brown's and St George's. So I do encourage you all, pop along to Albemarle Street, and you don't even have to go inside, but obviously do. The outside are some wonderful mosaics set into the wall, which still say Brown's and St George's Hotel. And if you're thinking why, well, it goes back to the fact that they took over this, this well-known hotel. And then the last piece of the jigsaw for our purposes is below that on Albemarle Street, where that red block is. And there were two small, not particularly, sort of important called Dean. One was called Dean's Hotel, and one was called the Eaton Hotel. They came onto the market in 1905. So this piecemeal growth, I mean, it's you needed the money to do it, but secondly, the opportunity. So they had to wait. But 1905, they pounced, bought those two properties, and again, knocking through walls made this one contiguous combined property. And what's lovely about Brown's now, why I'm so fond of it, is it still feels internally like a series of townhouses joined together. You still have corridors snaking around and level changes and funny doorways and stuff like that. So it's quite a charming place. Do go and have a wander around. The red mark shows you where today's Kipling suite is. Okay, so when we talk about the Kipling suite, so the big thing here is that clearly before 1905 it couldn't have been there because that wasn't part of the hotel. But that now is what we talk about when we talk about Kipling Hotel, Kipling Suite. So the other thing just to get our heads around is how much the hotel had changed over this period when the Fords are, in control, this kind of golden period. And you have to think that when James Brown sold it, we still, you had a hotel that was lit by candlelight. You had guests who would arrive at the front door in horse and cart, carriage and horse and carriage. And, candles would be, used to light the place. And yet, by the time the Fords departed, you had electric light, you had telephones, you had a lift had been installed. People would arrive by motor car. Charles Lindbergh stayed there, and he flew himself to Britain and stayed at the hotel. So, huge revolution in technology in this period. And, Kipling would have experienced some of that. The first public rooms are opened at Brown's Hotel in this period, around the sort of 1880s. So the first public dining room, the lounge. Interestingly, there was no bar at Brown's until after the Second World War. Okay, so people still often ate in rooms, but you could go to the restaurant as well. the first private bathrooms, again, incredible to think, but a lot of the rooms you had to go to a shared bathroom. There wasn't one, what we take for granted nowadays, and fireplaces for the heating. Just a story about the phone. So again, why Browns for me is so fascinating is it's so many things. It's an incredible cast of characters there, and so many things happen in this little, this the stage that is this hotel. And one of those things is the first telephone call in Britain takes place at Brown's Hotel. And it's a story told by Henry Ford, and he loved telling it. And I know this from his granddaughter, who he would tell it to and repeat it to. He was one for exaggeration, but I think there's nothing to say that this isn't true. I mean, it totally fits with the facts. So Alexander Graham Bell was doing a two for one. He was on his honeymoon, and he also was over in Britain to try to sell his new invention to the government, to companies. He stayed at Brown's Hotel, and quite understandably, he wanted to test his equipment before going to meet representatives of the government. He didn't want egg on his face. So he said to the Fords, is there any way I could possibly test this? And they happened to have a house in West London, which had a private telegraph line running from the hotel to their home, which they used for hotel business. And that was ideal for him. He could set up his phone in the hotel. Henry went to the house and they tried it one evening. And basically, it was a disaster. They couldn't hear anything because running next to the private telegraph wire was a public telegraph wire, and there was interference. So they got too much static and noise and chit chat and whatever. So they waited until 2, 3 in the morning, tried again, and at that time the call worked, and hence the first call took place at Brown's Hotel. And then the other thing to sort of think about is, we know about Kipling staying there, but he wasn't the only guest of note. In this kind of golden age, there was just a remarkable array of sort of well-known people, all sort of coming, staying at the hotel, and you see them in a very different light through the prism of the hotel. So, I've just selected, a handful. And I mean, I think for me, the big question to pose to yourselves is, did Kipling bump into any of these people? He could have. They all stayed during his time there. That period of Kipling's association. So Agatha Christie stayed many occasions, and I think some of you have mentioned this to me. The novel At Bertram's Hotel, The Whodunit, is said to be based on her experience of Brown's. At the time, it was a quite sort of quite a conservative place, perhaps a little bit sort of tired in its appearance, and the way she paints it, makes it seem even more so. Mahatma Gandhi, he came round for tea and had a very good ruse. He said that because he wore a loincloth, he didn't have anywhere to put any money, so his host had to pay the taxi fare, which I thought was a very good one. Queen Wilhelmina, she was came as a teenager. She was the youngest monarch in Europe at the time, and she came to visit family, which in this case meant Queen Victoria and the various relatives. She got forced to go to the British Museum, which she found very boring, but she also did some shopping, which she did enjoy. King George II, he was the King of Greece, and in that turbulent period between the two world wars, he was exiled and and he actually really rather enjoyed being exiled. He found being a king really quite, irksome, and he enjoyed living in London, playing as an English gentleman. He'd occasionally go and eat fish and chips somewhere, and he liked the life of an exile. Franklin Roosevelt, he came with his wife Eleanor in 1905 on their honeymoon, and the reason they came was because her uncle Theodore had sort of recommended it. He stayed here. Cecil Rhodes, he would come when he had a break from building empire in Africa. Joseph Conrad, so another author, he stayed at Brown's because his wife had some health issues, so they often had to come up to London for treatment and to see consultants. And William Vanderbilt, who was one of the railway magnate's offspring, very, very wealthy. He divorced his first wife, which was a big scandal, and he came to Britain for a quiet second marriage. So the Kipling suite, which is something that I've alluded to and showed you on the plan, something I dug up during the research was this original plan from the 1920s, which if you can see there, shows you first of all how all the rooms sort of interconnected. You could take one room or you could expand it into two, three, but also shows you how few bathrooms there are as well. So Kipling would take, invariably when he visited after 1905, he would take the two on the left there with the bathroom. He could expand it if need be to the third one there, but it's that area that is now the Kipling suite. And he used it for entertaining and all sorts of things. Um, it's been used for lots of different things over the years. It was a function room. People held wedding receptions there. This wonderful group from the 1920s. August bodies have met there. You might be aware of this one. Whoops, which we've just jumped over. So Kipling Society did actually used to meet there in the 1980s and 90s. And I found a reference in one of your journals to when that arrangement ended. So there was a lot of change of owners at this period. They used to give it free to the Kipling Society to meet in that room. Um, to be honest, if I was you with that yellow wallpaper, I would have left voluntarily. I mean, it's not a good look, is it? But yeah, so it was, that large sitting room had many different purposes, but generally was a function room. And then in 2004, they did a very, very large refurbishment. So the hotel, despite its, how many, it's 13 townhouses, it's only got 115 rooms now. So they've knocked a lot of the old rooms together to make suites and bigger rooms. Everyone wants a party, obviously has to have a private bathroom now. So from the area that where Kipling himself always used to stay when he came, they've now made this thing called the Kipling Suite. It is named in his honor, and it takes up this whole big space. Far right there, well, you've far right and in the red just above is the entrance. So this kind of big entrance hall, slightly larger than my whole house, I think. Um, then on the right there, you've got the bedroom. The purple just above it, you've got a walk-in closet. Then moving to the left in the sort of light blue, you've got an enormous bathroom, great big walk-in bathroom. And then the sort of, the real sort of showpiece, which you also get to from the entrance hall. So, you have guests that don't have to go through your bedroom. In yellow there is the big sitting room where you can entertain. And just to give you, in case any of you have not stayed there personally, I'll just give you a few little snippets of it. So nice little entrance there where they've done a nice nod to Kipling there with the monkey. And that's the bedroom there, which, gosh, I certainly, yeah, I'm sure I wouldn't turn down if anyone offered me to stay there. Some people say that that's a picture of James Brown's wife, Sarah Brown. I can assure you it's not. But again, hotels love legends. They love their stories. Uh, but I think it's been, very. The owner is Rocco Forte. His sister Olga Polizzi oversees all the decoration, in a very personal way, in a very personal style. So this is the sitting room, and you'll see that for example, there's the elephant there on the bureau. So she does, little nods to the history of the place and personal touches. I'll let you just soak that in for a second. Any guesses as to how much that might cost a night?
No,
Go on.
£7,000 a night.
You've stayed, haven't you?
Yes.
It is indeed.
Because my cousin and I, we did indeed pay a visit and asked the manager if we could see the suite. And he said, just a minute. Yes, it's free. Come along. So he showed us around the suite. And as you say, I think it was rather vulgar, but it's very magnificent. Oh, and I remember saying to him, well, that, I hope you don't mind. I don't want to be vulgar, but how much does it cost? He said, well, it's £7,000 a night. And I said to him, well, I think I'd expect a decent dinner for that. Oh, no, he said. Oh, no, no, no. No food.
Food included, exactly.
I said to him, well, okay. But surely at that price, you must find it a bit difficult, to fill it, putting it very bluntly. Oh, no, he said. Oh, no. We have families who come up regularly for 1 or 2 weeks a year and use it for their base in London. Now I thought, well, that's out. Hang on, but that's exactly what Kipling did.
Yeah, yeah. We're obviously all in the wrong job.
Oh, yeah. He assured me, book early. Really simple.
Excellent. Yeah. So as you say, £7,000 a night, an absolute snip if you want to really get the immersive Kipling experience. Maybe we can have a whip round or something.
Yeah, if we had any direct connection with Kipling, but on the wall by the door, the entrance door, there's a framed copy of one of
No spoilers, no spoilers, no spoilers. But you teed it up nicely. So anyway, so Brown's Hotel and those rooms in particular became very much the backdrop to Kipling's life. So many of the public things that you will be aware of. What's fascinating about the hotel is to see a sort of private, behind the scenes side of it. What was, kind of to link those two together. So I've just sort of picked a couple of examples out. For example, his Nobel Peace Prize in 1907. He went over to Sweden, to Stockholm, to receive the prize and had a very, very rough crossing on the way back to Britain. But he did manage still to message ahead to Brown's and ask for a light supper to be ready for him on his return. So again, Brown's was always that anchor point. Wherever he'd gone, wherever he was going, Brown's was his sort of, his a place where he could sort of reset himself and feel comfortable. And I think it's worth reflecting, why he's stuck with Browns. And I think it was that sense of privacy, that sense of, it was not a showy, flashy hotel. It was a hotel where, there weren't grand staircases to sort of descend. There wasn't acres of marble in the lobby. People wouldn't, you wouldn't have got paparazzi, even if they existed. But it was a discreet hotel, and I think he appreciated that. World War One, obviously, he came up often during the war. His son went up in London for training. He came and stayed at Brown's. His son had, been a Brown's regular through with his father over the years. And obviously, as you all know, tragically, he died in his first engagement at the Battle of Loos in September 1915. And Brown said, I think very poignantly, he said, if that admirable man, the head porter of Brown's Hotel, had been in charge of European diplomacy, there would have been no war. So it shows you, what high status he put it. It was also a sanctuary. So Kipling had an operation on his, I think on his bowels in early 1920s, and it was Brown's where he went to recuperate. His wife, when she was diagnosed with diabetes, she didn't want to go into a convalescent home or anything like that, and it was Brown's where they went to help her get better. And again, he said quite nice, and I like this. He said her diet was a plate of water through which a chicken has recently walked. So writing, obviously, so where you find Kipling, and Kipling, obviously, over that length of time, you find writing. So staff often commented that they would go into the sitting room to deliver food or a message, and he would be striding up and down the room, dictating his letters, usually to his wife. He was also a great typist, and there was one lovely story where he wanted a new typewriter. So he summoned the representatives of all the leading typewriter companies to come to his suite at Brown's. And he sat in front of each one and typed, for a minute or so. And at the end of that, when he left the room, they all sort of dived on the bits of paper, sort of assuming they would get some free, you know, gem from Kipling's mind, but he just typed gibberish, so they were rather disappointed. Um, Now, obviously, I can leave it to this. I said, you know better than Browns, but again, they love a legend. So, according to Browns, the Jungle Book, the Just So stories, you name it, it was all, of course, it was all written at Browns. Obviously, of course, it was. But anyway, there's no question. And as we was pointed out earlier, the suite does have one letter of his as a sample, but that's typical of his, uh, the many things that he produced while he was at the hotel. So, as I've mentioned, how Brown's was this magnet for people from all walks of life, many different endeavors. And writers, I think, particularly like Brown's, it was quiet, it was peaceful, you weren't disturbed. It was very discreet, and it felt like a home. You didn't feel like you were, you felt snug. It felt very comfortable. So to bring in a couple of other writers, Mark Twain stayed at Brown's in 1907. And just to sort of wind back a bit, Mark Twain had an adage which he said that, if you can't afford it, if you don't have money, never invest in business. And he said, if you can afford it, also don't. And he knew from personal experience, he'd invested very poorly. He was always, despite the money he earned, he would invest very badly in these schemes for new inventions with printing presses and new types of this and that. So he spent a sort of a decade or so traveling the world, giving lectures, trying to recoup the money to pay off his debts. He got home in 1900 and he said, "That's it. I'm never leaving the States again. Nothing will induce me." Well, as you know from Olympic rowers, that's rarely followed through. Um, what was the lure that got him out of the States and back to Britain? Well, interestingly, it was the promise of an honorary degree from Oxford University. And he said, Harvard have never offered it to me, Yale has never offered it to me, so Oxford did. And he was, it was enough. So he came over. He was in his 70s by that point. He was a widower. He was at the height of his fame. It was like a sort of Elton John farewell tour, Yellow Brick Road. And I think this big thing about the time people would spend at hotels in those days, now it's very peripatetic. We go, one night, next place, next place. He stayed for almost a month in 1907. And he brought his secretary with him. They had to take an extra room just to kind of cope with the huge quantities of letters and telegraphs, telegrams that he received. And he was feted everywhere. He was endless invitations. The Kipling Society, that wasn't there, but he would receive all these invitations to clubs, to dinners, to lunches, and he enjoyed it. He had a great time. Um, but then there's the really, for me, the tantalizing moment, this sort of what if sort of thing. So he wasn't the only person who received his honorary degree from Oxford at that time. So it was 26th of June 1907, 30 people received their honorary degree. The Prime Minister, Auguste Rodin, the American ambassador, one of the grandsons of Queen Victoria, and a writer again you might have heard of, Rudyard Kipling. So incredibly, both of them stayed at Brown's before going to Oxford to receive those honorary degrees. And it is so tantalizing. So Mark Twain leaves the morning before the ceremony to go up to Oxford. Rudyard Kipling arrives that same evening and stays at Brown's before going. So they missed each other by hours. So I'd love, the what ifs of history. They obviously having a moustache in those days was de rigueur, but if you can point out who all these all are, if you're a better person than me. But oh, and of course there was with wit being what it was in those days, there was an undergraduate who had to call out to Kipling and said, "It's not true that never the twain shall meet." So Lawrence of Arabia, um, jumping forward just a little bit here to just after the First World War, Frank Doubleday, the publisher, um, came over, American publisher, came over to Britain. He was also on his honeymoon. It seems to be a bit of a theme, bring your wife with you, but do business at the same time. And he installed himself at Brown's, and his task was to find writers who could write knowledgeably about the First World War, so that he could publish them and get a march on his competition. And he went to this rather dull dinner that he felt obliged to go to. That was, one of these big affairs hosted by American journalists overseas. And he sat next to this very quiet, very unassuming man who seemed to know quite a lot about the war and spoke knowledgeably. And Doubleday said, "Look, it's been lovely speaking to you. You must come round to Brown's for dinner and we can talk more and see where we can take this." So he went back to the hotel and he mentioned this to Kipling, who was there at the time. He said, I met this really fascinating guy, Thomas Lawrence. Have you ever heard of him? And of course, we said, God, Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, he's one of the great names, from the First World War. So you therefore have this, again, this wonderful, I mean, Kipling very recklessly missed meeting Mark Twain at Brown's, but he did meet Lawrence of Arabia. So Lawrence of Arabia comes to dinner with Doubleday. Doubleday, because of Kipling's interest, is invited along as well. And again, to be a fly on the wall at that dinner would have been amazing. And I'm now just going to sort of bring us slightly more up to date posthumously after Kipling's death. So I should have said actually that obviously he died in 1936, and it was very telling that the last place he was before going to hospital where he died was Brown's Hotel. He'd stopped there on his way to the south of France, um, had a hemorrhage and was taken to hospital, and it was on his wedding anniversary that he died. So a very sort of appropriate bookending of his life with Brown's Hotel as that, as that sort of playing such a pivotal role. And when his funeral was being planned and prepared and arranged, his wife, daughter, and son-in-law all stayed at Brown's Hotel. So that family connection was still there. So jump forward to Stephen King. He'd come over on a transatlantic flight, and on the way over, he'd got this spark of an idea, which would become the novel Misery. And he jotted it down on a napkin, and it was just this kind of very, very basic kind of spark of an idea. And because of jet lag and because of the idea knocking around in his head, he couldn't sleep. So he goes down to the front desk and he says, "Is there somewhere I can sit and write and, get me a big pot of tea and I can get this idea out my head?" And so the story he tells is that he was shown to this desk here and he was told, "You're very welcome to sit here, though you should mind that, be aware that Rudyard Kipling died at that desk." So again, a lovely legend and a story that the hotel likes to tell. It's still there in the hotel, the desk. So Stephen King wrote out the entire plot of Misery on the desk that Kipling, let's say at least hopefully used, but certainly didn't die at. But it's a nice story. Um, so that's the end of my talk. I just want to leave with a couple of thank yous. When I was doing the research for this book, two people were particularly helpful. I'd like to thank John Walker, the honorary librarian, who helped me with some of the sort of questions I had about Kipling and his life, and Richard Maidmont, who's one of your members, who was also brilliantly helpful in getting into the sort of the nuts and bolts of it all. My book, On Brown's Hotel, here it is, A Family Affair, makes a wonderful gift, and it's reassuringly expensive, I can promise. If you're looking for a copy, Hatchard's Bookshop, either in store or online. Brown's Hotel itself, it'd be a good excuse to walk in there. They've got it at the front desk or on their website. Or thanks to Mr. Google, just put in Brown's Hotel Family Affair and you'll find it. And anyone who wants to get in touch, has a question that they feel they were just too shy to ask or something occurs to them on the way home, you can get in touch with me at hotelhistoryexpert@gmail.com. Just before we come to questions, actually, I think my last slide is, yes, so that's what's on the facade, this wonderful mosaics. I mean, so it's still there as a reminder. They still couldn't do apostrophes, but, it's still a wonderful reminder of what had been